So I'm going to read 3 questions today if we have time, or at least 2 of them. And Christy's trying to get on, so just so you know, she's new to this, so hopefully she'll be okay. All right, so let me start with the first question. This person writes, how can I move past my husband's sexual past? I knew when I married him that it was part of the package, and I didn't think it would be a problem. But it turns out it's been so much more of a problem than I could have imagined. He's a good man and hasn't ever done anything, at least not intentionally, to make me feel like he compares me or wishes things were more exciting, etc. But always after sex, I'm left feeling terrible. I've told him a few times, but I also feel like it's unfair to make him rehash the past. I have to figure out how I can have this not be a problem for me anymore, and I could really use some tips on how to do that because I'm struggling a lot with this issue. So I'm going to talk about, there's 3 questions and they're all related, although they kind of highlight different pieces. But let me just kind of go through some ideas to help you think about this in general, and then I'll speak to some of the specifics of each of the situations. So the issue here is, in this case, within this person's mind. It's not really in the relationship, it appears, from what she's saying. And sometimes that's not the case. There was actually somebody who wrote in a question. I decided not to take up that question because it has to do with a lot more things going on in the marriage. But where, for example, he was giving her oral sex, and while he's doing it, he tells her that he had done this with a previous girlfriend. And this is also in the context of having misrepresented his past to her when they were dating. So he's making a move on her. He's actually trying to make her feel insecure and insufficient, and in a very vulnerable time, right? So that's a different challenge than what I'm talking about with these questions. These questions are all not about, I'm in a relationship in which my spouse is constantly making me feel insecure and doubt myself, because what I'm going to talk about right now does apply to that, but it has a lot more to do too with dealing more directly with the marriage relationship and the partner himself. So this woman is being clear. He's not trying to induce insecurity. He was straight with me about his past. I knew it when I entered in. But now that I'm in the vulnerability of marriage and letting him, really being with him sexually, I feel a lot more insecurity. And this happens in both directions. I've worked with plenty of men who knew clearly when they got married that their wife had had a sexual relationship or something prior to marriage, but then in the context of marriage start to feel insecure, insufficient, and don't know what to do with themselves about these feelings. So to start with, it's in the person's mind, it's not in the relationship. That is to say, she, in this case, is having a difficult time handling her own sense of adequacy when she knows he's had this previous experience. And so I think there's maybe 3 kind of meaning challenges to look at. The first is she feels insecure and she's unclear about herself, and she's unclear about her value, her sufficiency, and the issue of the past exposes this difficulty. That's how I would think about it. The issue of him having had other experiences makes her very aware of her own feelings of being insufficient. And so she's up against a challenge within herself, that she fears being not enough. She fears that his memory makes her pale in comparison. And she wants, in some ways, to eradicate his past, or wish she could make it, obliterate it, make it go, wish it didn't exist, as a way to make her feel sufficient. And it's very, very normal and human thing to do, right? You don't want to compete with other people. We just don't want them to be around, in a sense. But I think that it's, as normal as it is, it doesn't end up working, right? Because it's not in our partner that the problem exists, it's within ourselves. So it's her issue. And what she's having difficulty really receiving and being clear about is that he chose her, not the previous relationship, not the previous realities. And she was who he wanted. And so, this really isn't an issue of, she's making it a little bit the kind of commodification idea of kind of, am I sufficient? Do I supply good enough sex? Does he harbor memories of the other person and think that she was so much better, for example? And so she's kind of reducing herself to being measured by him rather than holding on to, yes, it will be there for later. Rather than holding on to this issue of the sexual friendship and the sexual relationship. I just need to deal with my dog 1 second. Hang on. Hey, John, can you get the dog and pick him up? He's just so loud and annoying. Okay. Sorry. So, okay. So she's doing this very human thing of measuring, do I supply good enough sex? Am I as pleasurable as his previous relationship? Rather than looking more at the issue of who am I and what kind of a friend am I and what kind of a sexual relationship are we creating and what do I need to deal with in myself to be clear about who I am and what I'm offering. So, he doesn't need to feel badly about his past experience. He can feel good about his previous experiences if so. But so it doesn't mean that has to be reduced necessarily, but that you can exist in the present moment and deal with the present, because that's all that really does exist. I mean, the rest is just memories that are in the present. They're meanings that are in the present. So dealing with the present is really the issue, although a lot of times I think we fear that somehow the past exists in a way. But who am I here, and what do I need to deal with in myself to feel clearer about my sufficiency? It's what we're doing. She's doing what so many of us do, is we externalize the issue of our value. It's very human. It's what we start in life doing, but we have to challenge it if we're going to get free of that, the trap of it, because you can't control how other people see you or feel about you. You can only control who you are and how you feel about yourself. And then a third idea, which I referenced for a minute, is just this commodification idea. It's very easy to do this, I think, for women. We've sort of been taught that we're suppliers of sex for men, and if you do it well or frequently enough or whatever, then he won't look at porn and won't cheat on you. And a lot of women get those ideas. I don't think they're particularly helpful ideas, but you see yourself as a commodity, and you need to supply the right thing for him to be happy with you. And I think for men, they can feel insecure about it because they're more in the meaning frame that I need to be the best lover, I need to be competent, I need to be the one who knows things. And if she's already had sexual experience, not only am I not the one who knows more, but she might even think the other person knew more. So it can be a challenge to their identity. So, again, I'm not minimizing the challenge, but it is a good working place for yourself. And so, it's easy to do instead to make your partner pay for your insecurity or to make them handle it. And this questioner was clear. She's like, I can't make him rehash this. So he understands, like, this isn't his issue. He doesn't need to feel bad about it. He doesn't need to reassure me once again, but I don't know how to deal with this in me. And I remember, like, a year into marriage, asking my husband, I'm like, well, can you just tell me, like, how far did you go with certain people? Like, he'd never withheld anything from me. I just hadn't really asked. And now that we were married, I was like, well, just tell me more about it. So he was honest, he just told me some things. And then I'm like, mad. And, feeling mad at him, which, like, I knew in my mind it made zero sense. How could, he didn't even know I existed at that time. There's no disloyalty, but somehow it just feels like I want the idea that you revolve around me and that and that you exist to reinforce me. I like that idea. It makes me feel more secure, rather than what I knew in my heart, but it was hard to get myself onto that focus, which is, his history and my history, like, made us who we are. They're part of growing into the people that we are in the present. It's part of how we chose each other. It's part of each being who we were. And, his sexuality and his history doesn't exist to reinforce me. It exists in its own right. And so can I grow up and let him be a whole person, not just somebody for me and my reinforcement? And, the reason why I think that matters is that it didn't make all the feelings of insecurity go away right away, but it allowed me to understand, like, the goal is to work with myself around this. And part of it is letting him be a whole person, and don't demand internally or between us some idea that he needs to prop up my sense of self. It, first of all, is unattractive. It's burdening him with something that he can't control and isn't his job. And I need to operate like a woman that I feel clear is worth choosing and being with, and somebody who's operating like an equal within my own heart. I needed to deal with my own clarity about, I know I'm a good choice, and that doesn't mean he has to feel terrible about anything in the past or diminish any of those experiences. That I just need to operate like a woman who I know is a good choice and can feel confident that the love and validation that he offers is real, meaning feel confident because I know it's worthy and it's honest because of who I am, right? So it means shifting your focus from what you can't control, the other person, any feelings or memories that may have, and shifting it onto what you can control, which is who you are, how you feel about yourself. So, okay, so let me just do another question, and then I can talk about this a little bit more, and then I'd love to hear what some of you are thinking out there. I don't mean when I was saying, don't post things that everybody needs to not write anything. Okay, let's see. So this person writes, my husband and I have been married 24 years, and I've always struggled with trying to live up to his sexual fantasies. He has a past, and she apparently did some stuff that blew his mind, but I find the idea gross. He says it's just in my head, but I'm not sure. Can I be sexually mature without doing everything he wants? And I would say to that, absolutely, 100%. Okay, the only reason, I just have people that I work with that will use the idea of maturity just because they want to do more things, that somehow they're more advanced, and that's just not true. I mean, what I think of as mature is being able to handle the issues of your own self, to be able to handle the issue of your own value. A lot of people, in the name of maturity, are trying to extract sexual validation by getting their partner to do the things that make them feel comfortable or validate their sexuality. But they're just as immature about it in their efforts to extract those behaviors as the person who's resisting that. So, broadness of desire for novelty is not a function of maturity. The ability to self-regulate and handle who you are, even in the face of invalidation, is a function of maturity. Your ability to partner, be two people collaborating, is a function of maturity. So there's a lot of people who are saying things that they want and looking down their nose at their spouse who are completely incapable of collaboration sexually. Okay. So going back to this question, can I be sexually mature without doing everything he wants? Definitely. Definitely. He says it's okay and that he doesn't expect it of me. That's nice and all, but why do I feel so compared and that he will never be satisfied? So I think it's important to ask yourself the question, for the person who wrote this question, to ask yourself, is my spouse trying to make me feel inadequate to get me to do what he wants? Or am I in a meaning bind within myself? And it could be both, okay? So is he saying, no, you don't need to do it, but actually I feel that he is giving me this message that I'm inadequate, or I'm repressed or immature, and if I would grow up, I would produce the behavior he wants, and he's doing it to kind of pressure me in this place where I am insecure, to extract what he wants. So is he doing that? I mean, that doesn't mean you don't still have your own meaning struggle, but to track it is important. Or am I in my own meaning bind, or I should say, because what it feels like that the person writing the question is struggling with within herself is, if I do the thing that he wants, am I not in a way conceding or competing with his past? And so I don't feel free in that. I don't feel like I'm really making a choice. I feel like I'm almost buying in that I've got to compete with his past, and I don't want to compete with it, right? And that's partly what she probably feels is gross about it, is it feels a little like she's diminishing herself, and that it's in a meaning in her mind where to do it is to reduce herself in some way. And if that's true, she's never going to want to do it, because first of all, it makes her feel somewhat trapped, and that meaning frame. And also because it's sort of like ceding some ground that makes her feel less in the end. And so she doesn't feel free in doing it. And when you desire, you feel free, right? When it's real desire, when it's real passion. So that meaning bind for her is, if I actually do it, I'm competing. But if I don't do it, then I'm the repressed, inadequate one. And so she's in a trap where kind of whichever direction she goes, it doesn't resolve itself. Either way, she feels controlled by the meaning either in his head or between them or within her own head. And that meaning is that I have to prove to you that I'm sufficient. So it's the external reference. It's trying to get him to think she's okay, that she can't work her way out of. So if I produce that behavior he wants, I'm trapped. And if I don't produce it, I'm trapped. Either way, I'm potentially reducing myself. So I feel like I want to interact with you more, because I'm not seeing anything, and I don't know if it's just something on my side. But what do you think? Anybody want to take a guess as to what I think that would be her way out of this trap? Anybody have an idea? Yeah, new thought pattern for sure. Any guess what that would be? Good, I'm glad. Okay, I can see that you guys. She needs to look at herself and what she's wanting. Yes? Good. Maybe ask him why he has to do these things. Yeah, maybe understanding him more would be, okay, good. Maybe understanding him more would actually be helpful for understanding the meaning that's operating in him around this, right? Because I think she did say something about that. Oh, wait, yeah, let me just give you a little more of this question. I didn't finish it. Why do I feel so compared that he'll never be satisfied? And then she says, apparently I'm too vanilla. So my question for her, and this is getting to this question, I'll come back to what some of you were writing, is that too vanilla for him or too vanilla for herself, right? Because she's doing this external reference. He says that would mean that I got out of my head and just really wanted him. So he's exposing a bit what his meaning is, like that you wouldn't just be in such a controlled position, and that you would really just, it would be a way of like wanting me enough to expand yourself or to try something new. Or in fact, in some ways, he might be saying not competing with my past, not making that so important, and just being with me, right? That might be what he's actually pointing to or wanting. And so for him, it might mean that, the good meaning. But I think for her, it doesn't mean that yet. Again, it means she's submitted to some kind of measurement in her head. And so she says, I've sexually wanted him a lot, but I've never had the urge to do what he wants. Is something wrong with me? I mean, I would say it makes perfect sense if I'm right about the meaning trap that she's in, that she doesn't want, because she doesn't want to be submitted to this. She doesn't want to submit herself to this external measurement by going forward with the behavior. But that's the problem. It's not until she takes this into herself more that she's going to feel free. The reason why she doesn't feel free is he's the measure, not herself. So just going back to, let me just see if some of you were speaking about any of this. I go back to here. Then Tyler says, I don't know. That's why I'm tuning in. Okay, well, we'll help you out here, Tyler. Okay, let's see. No ideas, but here I am. Elizabeth says she could go after the sex she wants instead of worrying about what he wants. Exactly. Elizabeth's pointing in the right direction there. She could make some suggestions about what she would enjoy. Yes. I would recommend exploring her own fantasies and coming up with something they can explore together. Yes. Finding more peace with her own sexuality. Yes. Good. You guys are all on track. Absolutely. So she's got to reconcile, instead of making him the measure, which is an easy way to hide. And a lot of us prefer it. I'll do what you want, but then feel like a victim of you, rather than expose my own erotic mind or expose more of me or tolerate you knowing me more. That's an easier thing to do for many of us, is to yield to somebody else, but then resent them for the control or the way that we feel like we're invisible. So we choose invisibility, but then resent the person for their complicity in that, or their willingness to go along with it. But yeah, what the muscle she needs to work is to start earning her deeper self-respect, to show up herself more, for herself to be half of that relationship. And so it might mean, thinking about, as some people were writing, what does she desire? What does she want? I sometimes use skiing as a metaphor. He wants to go down some, black diamond trails and she's afraid of it. Okay. Well, you can have fun on a lot of different ski paths. Okay. There's a lot of ways to have a good time. And so is there something that you want to try and do that's more joyful and expansive for you? Because if you're just going on the paths that your partner wants to go on, you're never going to feel free. And so is there some way you can show what gives you joy and pleasure that he can join you in, and or that you can create something that you both would really like to do, that you both would feel really good about? Because it's about partnering, not, dominating and yielding in this sense of deciding what you do. So, so it's knowing her own mind, exposing herself more. And also, I think that it's about being willing to just claim for herself her own value as a person. To stop making him the measure. Why am I making him the measure? What's he have that I don't have? Why am I making, of course it matters to me how he feels about me, but I'm neglecting my own feelings about me. And what do I need to address, if anything, to feel clear that I am a good choice? So, when she says I'm too vanilla, apparently she's saying he doesn't like it, but I'm making that too important. What do I think about what I'm doing? And I need to get into a clearer place. One way to do that is to better understand your partner. Not because they're right, but if you want to understand your own position and to have more integrity in it, you want to look at the limitations in your position. You want to see what you're getting wrong in your eyes. And the way to figure out what you're missing is to get input from your partner. What is it that is the meaning for you that I won't do this? He seems to be saying, you're too anxious, or you're too kind of controlling of something. You're trying to hold on to something, and I just wish you wouldn't hold on to that so much. I think that's a piece of it. That's worth her thinking about. Is it a rigidity that comes out of fear, or is this about, this is who I am, and it's the best in who I am, and you just keep trying to push me to be something else because you don't want to deal with who I am? That's one possibility. Or am I too fear-based, or am I too anxious, and I'm, we're in a kind of struggle over who's right. Mike says, but steep in deep powder is pretty epic. Maybe we need to seek out powder days and take some lessons. It's true. But I also think that there is, I don't know if skiing's the best metaphor in some ways, but what I would say is I work with a lot of people who get really fixated on a particular behavior, and they use the idea that this means that they're so developed that they understand what good sex is, and they don't understand what good sex is. This is more that they're looking for self-reinforcement than anything that's really intimate. That's really about two people showing up. So a lot of people are using kind of behaviors that are outside of their normal routine and saying this is more developed, as opposed to I want to feel that sense of control or your validation by doing the thing I want. But it's pretty boring actually for the partner, because it's more about him looking for reinforcement through her than really being together in a different way. Okay, skiing's the best metaphor. Okay, good. Let's see. Hang on a second. Maybe vanilla is a way of saying he needs her to own her part and some initiative of that side of their relationship because he's feeling overwhelmed. Let me just read that again. Maybe vanilla is his way of saying he needs her to own her part and take some initiative. Yes, because he's feeling overwhelmed. Right. So I think that what Brandon's saying there is that it can feel a little bit like, for some people who are the ones that are wanting to try something new, or do, if their partner won't sort of take up, in this case, her half and sort of drive this together, it's a little bit like hiking up a mountain, and how do we maybe we take out little side adventures. You can do this with skiing too, go do a side adventure, and but you're doing it together. And sometimes you might be pushing you into terrain that you're not comfortable with. I don't mind the idea of skiing as long as it's not that like wanting, oral sex is a black trail, and yet wanting more kind of intimate lovemaking is green. I don't think that's really fair, because for some people that's double diamond, okay? Double black, meaning they're like, that is too much for me. I don't want my eyes to be open, okay? So you have to sort of look at how are you measuring what's the scarier thing here, because it's not always as it appears. But I think what Brandon's saying is, maybe he's saying, I want to know your half. I want to know what you want. Now, a lot of us think we want to know things a lot more than we do want to know them, because when I work with couples, so often they have a hard time wanting to actually know their partner's mind. They don't want to know what they want because of the invalidation that might be in it. They also don't want to know why their partner doesn't want it because of the invalidation in it. So what's really hard to do is to actually be intimate. Tell me why you don't like the idea of that sexual behavior. What does it mean for you? What does it represent for you? And to stay in a position of trying to understand it enough to look at your own desire through their eyes. And in a way, it's such a simple thing, but people so instinctively resist it, because as soon as their spouse starts to open their mouth to explain why they want something or they don't want something, the other person's already challenging it and saying, yeah, but that's because you're too limited in this way or that way. And if you'd get it together and be more like me, this would all go so much better. And that's when you don't want intimacy, you want reinforcement. And people have a hard time believing that understanding, questioning your own view within yourself by looking at it through your spouse's eyes is the way to start going on more adventures together. Instead of trying to get your spouse to see how dumb they are for their view and get them to validate your view. That's how you always just stay stuck at the top of the hill. Okay. All right, let me see if there's other things people have said here. What do you do if the problem is that he doesn't want to deal with who she really is? Yeah, that happens a lot. And I think intimacy is a unilateral endeavor, is something that Dr. Schnarch used to say, which is that exposing who you are is a responsibility that you have in an intimate partnership, even if your spouse doesn't want to deal with it. So that might sound like, let's say it's this woman who's trying to be more intimate, is to say, I'm going to show you who I am. I feel judged by you when you talk about this as vanilla. I feel like you are taking a simple-minded view of who I am. Okay. And just showing who she is, not to prove it to him. I think this is really important. It's not about cramming her view of herself down his throat, but letting him see who she is and holding her own position in front of him. that frees him up to understand how he's experienced and her honest view and who she is. That gives him the freedom to think about that. Am I reducing our sexual relationship to just be a reinforcement for me? And or am I feeling like she, is that true? And if it is, what do I need to address in myself? Because if he thought it was true, then he could ask more, like, in what way do you feel that I don't really understand you or know you? In what way do you think I'm just looking for reinforcement? And would allow her to show more of who she is. If he didn't want to know it, she could be clear. I really want a good sexual relationship with you, but I don't feel like you have any interest in knowing who I actually am. And until you become more interested, I don't want to open up to more possibilities with you, because I want this to be about two of us. So it's unilateral, but you can at least keep showing up honestly, not in a self-righteous way, but being clear about who you are. Okay, let me just read this one. This person writes, anonymous question. I've been married 30 years. Rather than a sexual past, my spouse had no sexual experience prior to our marriage. Rather than a perspective of exploration around sexual expression and shared pleasure, she seems committed to preserving a non-sexual image of self and of our marriage relationship. She has, over the years, put me in the patriarchal category of the insatiable male, adamantly resisting discussing our sexual relationship, resisting discussing it. I stopped initiating sex nearly 10 years ago because I wasn't interested in one-sided sex. Sexlessness seems to be the norm. Is there any hope of shifting this, and how? Okay, yeah. It's a big question, so I've got to think about it in terms of this. I'll just speak about it in one way right now, just because it's related to the larger theme, and then I'll go on to the third question here. But the theme in the parallel here in this question, and what I was just saying, is this issue of self-validation being fundamental to intimacy. I worked with a couple once where she was always saying, I'm so glad you're not one of those natural men that want sex. And it was a sexless marriage. And he was so much in this kind of accommodating, nice guy position that he would really get pushed back by that. Plus, she would use the idea that she was depressive and vulnerable and anxious. And so he was a really good guy. She would validate him in this way that mattered to his sense of self. To his reflected sense of self. She would validate that, you're one of these good guys who's not so selfish and hedonistic, and you're one of the good ones. So it would make him feel unable to address the issue of the sexual relationship because he didn't want to be selfish. He didn't want to make her anxious because good guys don't do that. And because of his own difficulty validating, I sometimes hate using these words because it's a little hard to understand what I mean. He had enough difficulty being at peace enough with his sexuality and his desires that he would sort of defer to her meaning frame while feeling resentment and anger. So he was having a hard time being more intimate in the marriage. By intimate, I mean showing who he was. He was having a hard time dealing with his own relationship to sexuality, his desires, what kind of marriage he wanted, because she wasn't supporting the same view. So he would tuck it away. He was complicit in it being sexless, not that he could unilaterally decide otherwise, right? But that he was staying quiet, but there was growing resentment and anger in the marriage. And so, it wasn't until that got too costly for him emotionally that he started confronting himself more. That is, he started looking at his own difficulty with being more honest in the marriage and speaking more directly and about who he was and what he really wanted, and tolerating that she wouldn't like it, that it was going to push her and them in ways that were going to be really uncomfortable for both of them, because he's breaking out of his nice guy, go along, don't make waves persona that he'd known very, very well, his own difficulty with intimacy, and asking for her to show up more and to grow herself up more, for them to be less entrapped by their fears. So it came from him, who I think was ostensibly suffering more. It's often is the person that breaks the pattern, by him showing up unilaterally, more intimately, and starting to talk more directly about who he was and what he wanted, and destroying the kind of miserable equilibrium between them. And it wasn't by getting her to buy in, but buying in within himself that staying quiet about this was no longer tenable, no longer something he could feel good about within himself, and then he had to tolerate the inherent vulnerability or exposure of living more honestly. I know that these ideas are a little bit hard to understand without like having taken a course to understand, kind of how they come together. But the big thing is that in order to create a collaborative relationship, you have to deal with your own mind, your own values, who you are, and get more able to be at peace with who you are. The only way you can do that is to start to expose it to yourself, okay, and to your partner, but also to let that view be challenged by what other people think about it, okay, what your spouse thinks about it, what the flaws are in it, not because you have to submit to your spouse's view, but you use their view to look at your own view, to get more solid, more honest, more, to accommodate more truth in your view. So you value the invalidation because it helps you organize and get more solid within yourself. But what you're taking up is your own self in relationship to others. Good marriage therapy or marriage coaching is helping people. I use the frame of marriage work to help people get more solid within themselves. That's the goal, because it's what you need to be able to be a good sexual partner. It's what you need to be able to be a good marriage partner, but it's also what you need to just bring your functioning up and be somebody who's more at peace. And so that's how marriage is a developmental mechanism. It's a soul expanding process, if you will let it. But that's by looking at who you are within yourself, addressing who you are, but using your spouse's invalidation to do it. So going back to these questions, this is a place of exposure. When I was talking to my husband, this is a place of exposure, not of him so much as of me, that I was now feeling insecure and wanting to make him pay for me feeling insecure, very mature move. And so, and instead using it as like, no, okay, this is showing me something about myself that I can't yet handle in a way that I respect. I know I'm being childish inside of myself, and I need to address what I'm doing to feel more secure about me. Okay, let me just see where everybody is here. Okay, good. So let me go to the third question here. This person writes, does anyone else deal with feeling sad, anxious over a spouse's prior sexual experiences before marriage? Any advice on how to let it go? A little background, I've been married to my husband for a couple of decades. Before we got married, we discussed how far we'd gone with others. He definitely had a more colorful past than me. It bothered me, but I believed in repentance and forgiveness, and I loved the person he was at the time. Fast forward 15 years, we did JFF's courses to help improve our relationship in general. It was a life changer. The sexuality course helped both of us as well. However, we discussed our pasts again, and this time I asked more questions and realized he'd been more involved with girls than I thought. It was very painful for me to hear. I don't believe he deceived me before we were married. I think it was partly my ignorance, being on the side of sexually naive. Since our discussion 3 years ago, I just can't let it go. Images of him and what he did will pop up all the time, and it causes extreme emotional pain for me. I've worked on forgiveness, trying to see it as normal teenage development, recognizing that we have a good life, and he's not doing anything right now to betray me. This is all in the past, etc. This all helps, but I still feel that it blocks me from loving him fully. Help. Okay, so Yeah, I think, first of all, I think you're pushing on yourself in the right way on this last bit, what you're saying. Trying to understand it as normal teenage development, like this was not aberrant behavior or something that, exposes him as a derelict in some way, right? But also recognizing the present. We have a good life. He's not doing anything right now to betray me. And this is just part of his past. But you're holding back on something. Something still blocks me from loving him fully. And I think that's worth really thinking about. What is it that if I'm afraid to really love him entirely, what am I afraid might happen, given that he's had these other experiences? I'm not sure if I know what the answer to that is, but I can maybe guess there's something about either wanting to punish him for that past somehow, even though it doesn't make a lot of sense, but a desire to sort of hold back and say, well, you can't have the full or the best of me. Is it in part because you're trying to have him matter less when you realize you don't have him in your back pocket, right? I mean, I'm not saying this is a lot what happened to me too, which is like, oh, okay, this person's like a whole person. Okay, they've had their own relationships, they've had their own life, and so I think what the questioner is really kind of up against here on some level is to be able to accept the entirety of your spouse. And I think this is so much a part of healthy desire, is that you offer what you would want yourself. I work with a lot of women who had their own history. Okay, they had and then they get married and then they feel punished for that history. So just as in the opposite direction. And so they feel a sense of, why can't you just accept, why does it have to be about you so much? Can't you just accept me for who I am? And, accept me for the way that these experiences have shaped my life and shaped who I am and shaped who I am in being with you. That I wish you had more ability to love me, not just as it reinforces you. And, I was watching Downton Abbey with my daughter who's never seen it. We've been rewatching it together. And so there was the one, if any of you know the story, when Lady Mary tells Matthew, who is her beau, or at least someone she's interested in, that about the fact that she had a sexual relationship, or a sexual experience one time with somebody. And I think he has some feelings about it. It kind of challenges his sense of himself and of her. But at a certain point, they revisit it, and he says, can you forgive me for this? And he says, I don't have anything to forgive you for. Meaning, what he's saying is, this isn't about me. This is about you, and I love you, and I choose you. And, I think the thing that's so desirable about this character is that he can love a whole person and doesn't need her to just reinforce who he is. And he can be whole himself and be true to who he is as well, even though that means there's conflict between them, but that because they're each bringing their differences in an honest way. But, you don't owe me reinforcement. And I think we would all want that from our spouse, and being able to offer it. Can I be a whole enough person, a clear-headed enough person, that I can love someone even if he doesn't just reinforce me, that I can value him, that I can value who he is, how he's come to who he is, to see who he is now, and not need to in some way push down on him or resist loving him because I need him to just bolster my insecurities or manage my sense of self for me. So let me just see what questions or comments or thoughts people are having. This person says, the hardest part for me of showing up more authentically is facing the thing I've always feared that led me to hide, losing the validation and the relationship. Even though I know the inauthentic relationship isn't worth keeping, it's still terrifying. 100%. That's right. At least my integrity will keep me warm at night. Yeah, exactly. That's cold comfort, but yes. So, yeah, it's hard. It's 100% challenging. I'm teaching the men's course right now. I'm trying to decide if I'm going to show some clips from a movie that I think capture this really well, that in order to really expand your life, you have to walk towards your fears. And often for a marriage to get better, you have to tolerate the risk of it falling apart. On some level, to grow, you have to value your integrity over validation to really push yourself into more solidness. And it's really easy for me to sit here and talk about it. It's just a nice idea. It's another thing entirely to do it. It's hard to do it. It's hard to live honestly. And, the movie that I'm thinking about showing, or clips from, is about a boy, which is really a story of two boys. One is a man who's a boy inside, growing into a man through honest action, through honest living, by choosing what's true over the validation that he knows how to extract from people. And so it scares him. He says, I was terrified. He keeps talking about being terrified because he's doing what's true, but he knows he'll lose the validation and may lose exactly what he wants, but he chooses what's true over the validation, the cheap validation he wants to get. And that's the drive wheel of his development into a person that's at peace with himself, but also a desirable person. Okay, all right, let's see. I just need Shaun White. How much I suck at snowboarding. Okay, I don't know who Shaun White is, but yes, that's right. And that's the paradox sometimes. It's like the information that we don't want is the information that helps us most. It's like the things you don't want to hear that have the gift within them. And so, what's his name? Ryan Holiday talks about the obstacle is the way. Jung talks about like what you least want to know about yourself contains the information that you need to get stronger. And so again, that's why marriage is a gift. And that doesn't mean it all works out and everything. If you just tolerate what's real, that you may be alone at night with just your integrity next to you in bed. But it's very, very valuable. It's just hard to see it for the gift that it is. This person says, it sounded a little more whiny and self-indulgent than I realized. I just wanted to point out the hard truth. Absolutely. No, I don't see it as whiny. That I wrestle with every day. Showing up authentically and with more differentiation doesn't mean you get what you want. That's right. Absolutely right about that. It might make it more likely, but I don't get to dodge the risk. That's exactly right. Exactly. And, sometimes living life well is walking scared. I'm kind of scared all the time. That's not true entirely, but I think I'm, at least when I've gone towards the things that have made a meaningful difference in my life, it's tolerating the exposure, it's tolerating the risk. And that's sort of the cost of self-expansion and a deeper relationship to your better self. This person writes, I have been letting go of the idea that my marriage may not survive, and there are lots of feelings of loss, the loss of the marriage I thought I had. Absolutely. Loss. I'm about to do a podcast right after this about loss and how loss is a kind of rupture in a pattern. And it's so disorganizing. It's so disorienting. It's so hard. It is so hard. I mean, life can be so painful sometimes when what you've held to, what's been valuable, falls apart. And I don't want this to sound glib at all because I really don't mean it as that. But that sometimes that break in pattern is exactly that's the places that human beings grow most, is in crisis, because their brains become more plastic. They become more able to adapt. But this is when what are the limitations in their own development, their own life, are now crystal clear. They're much more available to be addressed and to grow. Now, some people just, resent and double down, and people can certainly do that in the face of trial or in the face of the disillusionment. But if you're the best to yourself in the difficulty of disillusionment, then you'll use it to face as honestly as you can what you need to face about life, about your partner, about yourself, and extract as much learning from that as you possibly can. That's the best way to redeem it. It's the best way to make that suffering worthwhile. Suffering for the sake of suffering is horrible. But to use suffering to grow, well, it redeems it. It makes it worthy. And, you know, when I think back on my life, it's so much the places of suffering that I was able to develop some muscles to sustain myself better. And I'm sure I have plenty of suffering to come. Okay, so so life is. All right, what movie is that? It's about a boy. I realize this might be behind. Yeah, okay, got it. Yep, thank you. Good. Yeah, exactly. It's about two boys, they should call it. Okay, everybody. Well, thank you. I always enjoy these. I always stress a little before because it's like, okay, do I know what I'm talking about? And I'm going to be in front of all these people, but I really do enjoy them a lot. So I try to think if there's anything to mention. Can't think of anything. I always forget, and Ruby after would be like, you forgot to say. I can't think of anything. Okay. All right. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next month. Bye.